Welcome back to continuing coverage of YETICON 2022. My name is Corey Hansen, bringing you all of the action. 5 rounds of old school Atlantic MTG from the featured table here at Green Mountain Brewing on November 19th, 2022. This round 2 matchup puts Matthew Dennis on the left with the very cool Dan Frazier Mox playmat against Brandon McGill on the right. We're going to see some green in this matchup. Both players have very interesting decks. We're going to see some very cool interactions, and without further delay, let's get on over to game number 1. For game number 1, players going to a die roll to see who's going to get the call to go first. Taking a look at those hands, it looks like it's going to be Matthew with the look. Glance, and here we go. We are underway. Pendelhaven to start for Matthew. Very nice if you have some small green creatures, as Matthew does, as we'll see. On Brandon's side, we have a Mox Sapphire and the Factory for a Time Walk. Early Time Walk, get another card. So Brandon's going to take advantage of a little bit of card advantage there. He's also going to be able to swing in with that Factory and knock Matthew down to 18 here pretty quick in the early game. So not a bad Time Walk to play there when you've got a threat on the board that can come across. And already, boom, 18 for Matthew. All right, and he passes back the turn. Regular Forest coming down, so we have 2 green mana being tapped, and Argothian Pixies. That's a good answer for the Mishra's Factory. Mishra's Factory is not able to block those Pixies, and if the Pixies block the Factory, the damage is reduced to 0. Artifact creatures. They have kind of a protection from artifact creatures. Brandon has an island on his side, and he says, go on ahead. The Pendelhaven does not pump the Pixies. It only pumps 1/1 creatures. So it pumps them +1/+2, but only if they are 1/1. So trying a Sylvan Library here, and a quick counterspell from Brandon says, no, I do not want you drawing cards. And here come the Pixies. Pixies coming in. Brandon reaches for the dice to go to 18, and he does go to 18. No pump, no action right there. Looked like maybe Matthew was showing an instant there, but Matthew decided not to do anything extra. There is a Tropical Island for Brandon. Plenty of mana on Brandon's side, so let's see what Brandon can draw. Brandon's taking a look at what to do. Probably has a couple of different options he's considering, and he's going to attack with the Factory. So there is Matthew down to 16. Definitely not a bad play there. The Factory can't do anything about those Pixies, and especially nice play now to see that the Maze of Ith is coming down on Matthew's side. So that's going to be able to take care of an attacking creature, and another Sylvan Library for Matthew, and Brandon doesn't have a counter for this one, so here we go. Next turn, we're going to be drawing some cards. All right, Brandon says... Taking a look at his hand, he's got plenty of mana again still, so we have just about anything we want to do. And there is the Enchantress, the Verduran Enchantress, 0/2. Draws a card whenever Brandon casts an enchantment. Very cool. It's a deck archetype that a lot of people try to make work, and Brandon is giving it a shot here at YETICON. He's 1-0, so he's got a match win under his belt already here with the Enchantress, so we're going to see what the Enchantress does. Over on Matthew's side, Matthew takes a look at a couple of extra cards, and he's going to take 4 to draw 1 extra one from the Sylvan. And there it is, into his hand. Perfect. So 12 life already. So Brandon has some pressure on the board, but that Maze of Ith is really going to help Matthew keep this thing stable and not take too much more damage. The Wailuli Wolf also going to be a nice little trick to help him stay protected and to get on the offensive here eventually. Wailuli Wolf is a 1/1 green creature, and it can tap to pump another creature +1/+1. So now we have the Pixies start to attack, and then we have a Berserk on the Pixies right there, and they go down. So they are going to deal 4 damage. Brandon is going to go down to 14. I wonder if that's the play that Matthew had last turn when he kind of pump faked, reaching for a forest and reaching for his hand, but decided the better of it. And I'm guessing we have that Berserk there to deal 4 damage with a couple of cards because he has that Maze of Ith in play, and he knows that, and the Pendelhaven with the Wailuli Wolf, so he knows that Brandon can't do much with what he has on the board right there. The Factory is pretty much neutralized, and the Enchantress is not going to be an offensive creature and likely not going to be a defensive creature with the 0/2 stats. There's a Recall for 1. Brandon just showing his copy of the Recall. Very cool. And Brandon's indicating that he's looking to his graveyard. The players are checking about something, and Brandon shows he's going to discard an Enchantment Alteration. Very cool card, and he's going to pick back up his Time Walk, and he's going to play that Time Walk. So we're going to get another card draw, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to get another attack in. He was a mana short of getting to attack with the factory to force a pump on something, but he wouldn't have survived a Wailuli Wolf pump, I guess, so we wouldn't have nice opportunities to squeak in there. So Enchantment Alterations, we may see that come in a little bit later. If you're curious about that, it's an instant, and it can allow you to move an aura from one creature or land to another creature or land. It has to be the same type. And meanwhile, Matthew just took another 4 damage for another card, so that Sylvan has been doing some work for Matthew, but he's getting a little bit low on life. If Brandon can get a little bit of damage through that maze, then Brandon's going to be in good shape with all the cards that he's drawn. On the other hand, if Matthew has drawn some big boomer cards, that's going to be tough for Brandon, even with that low life total. Looks like he's coming in with the Wailuli Wolf, so the Wailuli Wolf's attacking for 1. And Brandon blocks with the factory and pumps for 3/3, and then it looks like it's a giant growth. To my eye, it's a giant growth that takes out that factory, so no damage through for Brandon, but that factory is gone. And that factory was what was holding back some of his smaller creatures, and that will do. That'll hold back some of those smaller creatures. That is an Urnum. That's a beautiful copy of Urnum Jin there. So Matthew's going to untap. He does have 2 creatures. He has the Scavenger Folk and the Wailuli Wolf. Pendelhaven can pump either of them. And it looks like on Brandon's side, there's not really very many juicy artifacts to destroy with the Scavenger Folk, just the Sapphire that I can see. So right now, that Scavenger Folk is likely going to be on the more offensive side. And there's Matthew takes another damage from the Sylvan Library. So he's down to 4 life. Well, that Sylvan's not going to be doing any more extra cards this game, probably, unless he can gain some life. But that Sylvan has drawn him maybe 3 extra cards. He's taken, I think, 12 damage from that. Brandon's come in for a couple of Mishra's factory attacks, and I think the rest of the damage to Matthew has been through the loss of life from the Sylvan. So he's taking a look at his cards, and he says, go ahead. Okay, no attack right there. Kind of tricky with a Ernie on the board and no Forest Walk just yet. Although in Brandon's upkeep, a creature is going to get Forest Walk. There's an invisibility on Urnum, so no blocking for Urnum, and he's going to draw a card for the Enchantress when the invisibility comes out. Very cool. And another factory, so Brandon does have another factory that he could spare. Came in at a perfect moment there as well, so now he's got a couple of... he went from having no defenses there for a part of a turn to now he's got pretty bulky defenses. And I believe they gave Scavenger Folk the Forest Walk. When I looked at the recording here, Scavenger Folk is the Forest Walker. And there's Brandon indicating that, he's indicating that they're going to mark the Forest Walking Scavenger Folk, so that the token you can see, or the counter you can see in the Scavenger Folk, indicates the Forest Walk. There's a Naf's Asp. Naf's Asp is a very cool stompy creature for old school. It's a 1/1 snake, and if it gets in, the defending player has to pay 1 generic mana sometime before their next, I think it's before their next draw phase, or they take an extra one, so they have to kind of pay to not take extra from the venom of the snake. Okay, so here is Brandon's turn on tapping, and it looks like he did get in with the Scavenger Folk and pump for 2 while I was talking about the Asp. So the Scavenger Folk Forest walked in there for 2 with the pump from the Pendelhaven. And Brandon's got another Enchantress, so if he can play another aura or another enchantment of any kind, he's going to be drawing 2 cards. So that's pretty nice card advantage engine Brandon's got there. And there is an activation of the factory, and attacking with the factory and the Ernie. He's going to maze back the Ernie, and he's going to block the factory and pump with the wolf. So the factory is blocked by the Asp, and it's pumped to 2/2. So the factory and the wolf, or not, the factory and the snake are going to trade because of that wolf. So this is actually really a complex board state by Matthew's side. He has both, or all 3, I guess, of the wolf, the maze, and the Pendelhaven. That always leads to some very, very complex battle math for both players. not just Matthew, not just Brandon, because the Wolf can pump things, the Pendelhaven can pump things. The Wolf can get a pump from the Pendelhaven and then pump itself on defense and be tapped. The Wolf could maybe pump the Scavenger Folk getting in there for a couple of damage again. So the Scavenger Folk can get pumped by the Pendelhaven and then the Wolf to take advantage of the Forest Walk. And Brandon has to consider all of those things as he's figuring out his battle plan. So we're attempting to come in with the Ernie. Maze of Ith sends the Ernie back, and it's back over to Matthew. Matthew's taking a look. Checking the mana for Brandon. He's kind of sorting the blue mana on one side and the green mana on the other side. That's why he checked, because there's an Ice Storm in the wings. Brandon's Library of Alexandria, which I didn't remark on, is not currently active. If Brandon gets a couple of enchantments down, that is a threat to become active, though. Here is Matthew. Matthew plays down another Pendelhaven and discards his first one. So when he plays the new legendary Pendelhaven, it gets rid of the old one. I wonder if there's some cool shenanigans you could do with that of tapping it to pump a creature and then having to discard another one and then pumping something else. You couldn't do the same creature because it'd already be pumped away from 1/1, I believe. So here again, we are pumping and attacking. So that Scavenger Folk is actually quite a big threat for Brandon. His Ernie into that maze is a big problem right now, and he's needing another threat to get over that maze. He's got to have 2 threats to come in to get through that maze so that he can only send back the Ernie and take the damage from whatever else he's sending through. Meanwhile, Matthew is building up an army of green weenies there, and he's going to still pump his Scavenger Folk and get in again. It is 6 life now for Brandon. 3 more attacks from that Scavenger Folk, and that's it. And less if he starts using, it could be 2 attacks if he starts using the Wailuli Wolf on offense instead of on defense. Here's Brandon casting a Control Magic. This is really, really huge. This is a great card advantage engine, even by itself. But with 2 Enchantresses down, it is massive card advantage engine. So the Wailuli Wolf is tapped, so he's going to tap and pump something to give it to Brandon tapped. Brandon's going to draw 2 cards, so that is a loss for Matthew, and then Brandon gains a couple of cards drawn out of it from the Enchantress. So that is really, really big. And the Wolf itself now can pump other creatures on Brandon's side, as he controls that, so he can pump other things coming through. That can have implications with the Maze of Ith, and again, that makes this position even more complex for both players. That Wolf is now on the other side and is able to pump things to try to get around or through that maze. So Matthew's looking at his options. He's going to go ahead and get in with the Forest Walk, take the two damage for Brandon right there. It's now 4-4. We're both really low on life. And Brandon's looking at what he's going to do. And there's an Instill Energy on the Wolf. So Instill Energy will let him untap it an extra time each turn. So now the Wolf can pump things by 2. So you want to talk about another complex math state. The Wolf can pump things by 2. I think earlier I may have missed when Matthew cast a Demonic Tutor. I believe he pulled a card from Demonic Tutor. And I believe he pulled a Hurricane earlier from his Demonic Tutor when I glanced at before. I think I was remarking on something else. So the Demonic Tutor, I think he grabbed a Hurricane. That's an interesting play here because they're both low on life. And there's no flyers on the board, but they're both low on life. And I think his plan is to try to get Brandon within range of a single attack. But anyway, the Instill Energy is on the Wolf. He's going to draw 2 cards, and he's attacking with the Urnum, and he's attacking with the Enchantress. 0-2 Enchantress coming across. The Maze of Ith is going to maze away the Urnum. They're taking care of that right now while he figures out what to do with this Enchantress, how we want to deal with that. So she's an 0-2, and he's going to block with both of those creatures. Brandon's going to tap the Wolf, untap it with the Instill Energy, and tap it again. So he's going to pump it by 2. Now, it looks like there's a trade right there. To my eye, I think the Enchantress might be a 2-4 on that, to my eye. I don't know if something else happened that the players had. When I watched it, I couldn't quite see. So it looks like there's a trade skis anyway. So here we go. 1 Enchantress left, 1 Enchantress down. And there's just a Forest Walking Scavenger Folk left. So right here, there is that Hurricane. So it looks like he's trying to Hurricane for 2. That's a really good play because that Hurricane for 2 puts Brandon at 2, and then he can Forest Walk in for the rest of the damage. But Brandon says, nope, mana drain. I want that mana, and I don't want to be taking a lethal attack right here. So we've tried the Hurricane. It looks like there was a die drop there, so players retrieving the die. This is a very exciting last couple of turns for this first game in round 2. And now Matthew's thinking, what can I do? I can't quite finish the job on this turn, and I don't know if I want to leave myself too vulnerable. Brandon says when you go to combat, when you go to your end of your main phase, I'm going to cast Enchantment Alteration. So he's going to switch the control magic from the Wolf over to the Scavenger Folk. So Brandon's going to take the Scavenger Folk, and Matthew has a tapped Wailuli Wolf. So before he can go to combat, Brandon's now got control of that Scavenger Folk, and so there's no attacking in. And with that, Matthew looks at the board and says, that's enough for game 1. I'm going to go ahead and pack this one in. So Brandon's enchantments take down game 1 right there with a little trickeration there at the end, taking that Scavenger Folk away from Matthew as he was thinking about maybe going to his attack. So a very, very exciting, very complex game number 1. I'm sure both of these players have some really interesting sideboard decisions they need to make, and we will see how they do in game number 2. After an exciting game 1, we are on to game number 2, post-sideboard right here. Brandon with the 1-0 advantage over Matthew there on the left side. Brandon is on the draw and taking a mulligan. Looks like Matthew is ready to roll, though, and he's going to start with a Bayou into a Llanowar Elf. Very good start for Matthew's deck. That's exactly what he wants to do in the early stages of his development. He's got acceleration or damage if he wants it, so he's going to draw. Brandon goes to, by the way, he puts down a Factory and an Emerald. Great start on Brandon's side as well. So the Elf is great because it gives you the choice of he could knock down a 3-mana spell after his Forest, or he could just swing in. But he is going to swing in, and before we go to damage, he says, not so fast. I've got 2 giant growths, not 1, but 2. That's one way to take 7 damage in a hurry right there on turn 2. I'm wondering if Matthew's plan here is to try to get Brandon to where the Urnum becomes a liability like in the last game. In the last game, Brandon's Urnum with a Maze of Ith down on Matthew's side became kind of a liability because the Scavenger Folk were getting in there for 2 damage every turn because of that Forest Walk. So if you're behind on life, if you've played cards like Urnum and Serendib Efreet in Old School Magic, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're behind in position or behind on life, it's a little bit harder to make those cards work. You want to use those cards to get yourself ahead, or you want to play them while you're ahead. So that could be Matthew's strategy here. He's got a Demonic Tutor. I'm not sure what he's tutoring for, but he's got probably a lot of interesting cards he can go for. Maybe it's that Maze of Ith because he might suspect a big creature coming up later. We'll see. But the Elf was tapped right there for mana. Brandon did have a counterattack with the Factory before that I think I was talking during that counterattack with the Factory after the Elf attack. So it is 18-13 now to Matthew. Brandon puts down a Urnum Djinn. There it is. So the great answer would be to drop that Maze of Ith right now if that's what he tutored for indeed. Matthew's looking at his cards. I think I see a Berserk in there. Berserk could also be used offensively or defensively. You could Berserk an Urnum Djinn to take double damage, but then the Berserk will take out the Urnum Djinn at the end of the turn. Instead, he goes for the Argothian Pixies. It looks like he's indicating that the bottom elf, the elf on his right, is the forest walking elf. That is relevant because we have a basic forest and a tropical island on Brandon's side. And Brandon's just going to say, pass, go ahead. Still 18-13 here. Both sides kind of developing their boards. A few defensive cards in play. Some bigger creatures are working on defense. There's an Ice Storm. This is very interesting because the Ice Storm is on the basic forest. You might want to remember that play. Put that in the back of your little noggins at home, everybody, in case you wonder what was going on with that one. I'm wondering if Matthew would have chosen differently if he had seen the second Factory come down. It's kind of interesting, the timing there. Only one Factory was down when he played the Ice Storm. The second one came down. We all know Factories can become very potent when they work together. So 2 Factories is quite a bit stronger than just the one. So I'm wondering if Matthew would have chosen differently if that second Factory had been on the board. There is a Spitting Slug, boom, from the dark. It's 2/4, and the Spitting Slug, if you pay when it interacts with a creature in combat, if you pay, it gains first strike. Otherwise, if you don't pay, the other creatures it interacts with will gain first strike against it. So it's one of those cards that it either has first strike or it has first strike against it. It's very kind of a very flavorful card. So Urnum Djinn came in there, and while I was talking about that one, we had the Elves of Deep Shadow do a block, and boom, there is the Tsunami. That could have been the tutor target, and if you're wondering why the Ice Storm went in the basic forest, that's probably your reason why. Matthew was planning on going ahead and blowing up the tropical island with the Tsunami right there. So the Tsunami, boom, takes out the island and the tropical. Unfortunately, he can't do anything about those factories, but that's a big play right there. It's going to take all of the colored mana except for a single green from Brandon. It also, interestingly, will turn off Forest Walk. So we have a double attack there with the Slug and with the Pixies, and it looks like we had a block on the Pixies by the big Djinn over there on Brandon's side. Here's Brandon with the Strip Mine, so it's now 18-10. He did get in with the Spitting Slug after the block on the Pixies. So no more Pixies. Spitting Slug did get in. So here we got Spitting Slug doing some damage in this match. Very cool. Brandon is looking at his attack here now as a counterattack. He's got a couple of big creatures. He's deciding what to attack for. He's going to attack for 11 right here. So Matthew's going to go down to 7 life. Brandon's got 10 right there, so he's a little bit vulnerable. There's 3 creatures down there, one of which is Forest Walking, but that's not actually relevant right now on the side of Matthew. So Matthew's got to figure out, what can I do? I've got a 5/6 flyer and a 4/5 ground pounder along with those factories. He is going to go ahead and come in with everything. He's got a 2/4 slug and a couple of 1/1 elves. So Brandon is going to tap the Strip Mine. I believe that's for mana. He's going to tap the Strip Mine for mana. He's going to activate a factory, and Brandon's looking up here, looking to see where to go. He's going to block the Spitting Slug, and he's going to pump it. So he's going to pump that factory to 3/3, so it'll survive the Spitting Slug attack. And over here on the side of Matthew, we have a Giant Growth and then a Berserk on the unblocked elf. So he's got 2 unblocked elves. One of them gets pumped to 8. And Brandon is going to take 9 damage. It's now 7 life. Brandon's down to 1. And right there, it looks like the wrong elf went to the graveyard. Not a big deal, but if you're wondering what happened with the elf there, the Berserk should have taken out the elf on the bottom there. But looks like the wrong elf went to the graveyard. Doesn't really matter because on the next action right there, the next turn, Brandon is going to come in with the big Mahamoti Urnam Djinn and his factories to do well more than the 7 damage needed to take out Matthew. So a very, very tight game 2 right there. Brandon taking it with just 1 life remaining. There was just one little bit. Matthew put up a good fight there with his smaller creatures. Brandon was able to just get a little bit more advantage on board, and Matthew's combat tricks did a ton of damage to Brandon's life total. Unfortunately, they fell just 1 short. That's happened to all of us, and I'm sure it'll happen to all of us again the longer we play this game that we love. So Brandon here moves to 2-0 with the Enchantress Tricky Enchantment Alteration deck. We didn't see the Enchantress or the Enchantment Alteration here in Game 2. Matthew goes to 1-1 with the very cool elf-themed deck. I love to see Spitting Slug. I love to see Elves of Deep Shadow. There's all those cool cards. Anytime you have Berserks coming down, the Tranquility that Matthew's showing from his sideboard would have been pretty brutal against Brandon's deck. That's definitely a good sideboard choice. So as the players kind of finish chatting here, I'm going to go ahead and sign off and get you ready for round 3 action here from YETICON 2022. We are rolling on.